The snow fell like ash over the northern ridge, each flake a whisper of the goddess herself. Kira's bare feet left no mark on the frozen earth, not because she walked without weight, but because the pack had bound her gift centuries ago, silencing the earth's memory of her presence. Silent, invisible, marked for erasure. The banishment came at moonrise, when the Alpha King stood before the assembled pack with eyes like molten steel. Kira had not spoken in 7 years, not since the day her voice saved his life and damned her to this fate. A gift uncontrolled was a threat. A gift unspoken was mercy. The pack elders had decided she would be driven beyond the territories, into the Shadowlands where even the wolves feared to hunt. His name was Aster, and he had not looked at her once during the judgment. Now, with her torn dress hanging in ribbons and her skin already turning blue beneath the endless sky, Kira knelt against a massive pine. The moon rose full above her, ancient and knowing. Her left wrist bore the mark. A silver crescent burned into her flesh during the ritual of banishment, a brand that would ensure no pack would claim her. No Alpha would recognize her as anything but cursed. The wind carried the scent of blood, not her blood. His. Through the trees, she heard the crashing, heavy and wounded. A massive gray wolf emerged from the darkness, limping, its silver fur matted with crimson. The Alpha King had been thrown from his throne by his own brother, betrayed by those closest to him. And now he was dying alone in the very wilderness where his sister had been cast out hours before. Their eyes met. His were amber now, fading toward black. Hers were still silver, the mark of a pathfinder, a healer, a woman born to mend what was broken. Aster shifted, human form collapsing against the snow. Blood pooled beneath his ribs. His breathing was shallow, each exhale a cloud of desperation. Kira's throat burned with 1,000 words she could not speak. The binding on her gift was absolute. She could not heal. She could not call for help. She could only watch him die, as she had watched so many die, her power locked behind teeth that had been sewn shut by magic and shame. But the moon saw her. The moon always saw. Aster's eyes fluttered open. Through the haze of dying, he recognized the crescent on her wrist, the mark of the Banished. His sister, the one he had sentenced to exile to protect the pack from her untamed gift, the one whose silence had become her only language. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though his voice was barely sound. Kira did the only thing she could. She lay down beside him in the snow, her body a barrier against the killing cold, her hands pressing against his wound. No words, no magic, just presence. And in that moment, as her warmth met his dying flesh, something broke. The binding on her gift cracked like ice beneath spring thaw. A faint silver light bloomed from her palms, not enough to heal, but enough to slow the darkness, enough to keep him tethered to this world. The moon witnessed. The goddess smiled. Above them, the northern lights began to dance, green and violet, as if the sky itself was writing a prophecy neither of them could yet read. Aster woke to softness, a paradox in the Shadowlands, where nothing was meant to comfort the cursed. Warmth surrounded him. Firelight danced against stone walls. They were in a cave, deeper than any he had ventured, where the ancient symbols of the old magic still glowed faintly on the walls. Kira sat across the fire, her knees drawn to her chest, watching him with eyes that held the weight of 7 years of silence. She had removed her torn dress and wrapped herself in furs she must have gathered in the hours before dawn. Her silver hair fell like mercury down her spine. The crescent brand on her wrist caught the firelight, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. He tried to stand. Pain exploded through his ribs, and he fell back onto the furs beneath him. She did not move, did not offer comfort, did not speak because she could not. "Why?" His voice was rough, broken. "Why didn't you let me die?" Kira's jaw tightened. She reached for a clay vessel and drank, then gestured to another beside him. Water, medicine, the practical care of someone who knew how to survive abandonment. Aster sat up slowly, studying her. The crescent on her wrist, the silver eyes that had once been hidden behind a veil during pack ceremonies. She had been their oracle, their hidden weapon, their shame. He had ordered her banishment to prove to the elders that even his own blood could not supersede the law, that he was strong enough to do what was necessary, that he was capable of cruelty if cruelty was what the pack demanded. "The binding," he said slowly. "On your gift. Did I—" Kira closed her eyes. A tremor ran through her body. She rose and walked to the far side of the cave, where shadows pooled thick and merciful. "I'll leave," Aster said, and meant it. "I won't stay where I'm not wanted. You've repaid any debt between us." She turned so sharply that the movement was violent. Her mouth opened. He saw her struggle against the binding, saw the silver light flicker in her throat where the magic had been locked away. Pain crossed her face, the kind that came from trying to break chains, forged by ritual and fear. Then she did something he did not expect. She held out her left hand, palm up. The crescent burned bright, and with her right hand she traced symbols in the air, old language, old magic. The fire leapt and danced, spelling out words in flame. "You cannot leave. The moon will not allow it." Aster's blood went cold. "The moon marked?" She nodded once, sharply, as if the confirmation itself was a punishment. In the oldest traditions, before hierarchies and laws, the goddess marked true pairs, soul-bound, fated, woven into the very fabric of destiny itself. It was rare. It was absolute, and it could not be refused without bringing curse upon both. "This is a lie," he said, but his hands trembled as he said it. His wolf recognized something in her, a wrongness, a rightness, a completion he had spent 7 years denying. Kira walked to him and placed her hand over his heart. The crescent on her wrist burned hot against his skin. Beneath her palm, his heartbeat changed, slowed, synchronized, became an echo of her own pulse. She met his eyes and shook her head slowly. Not a lie, a truth the moon had written long before the pack had ever drawn its first breath. Aster pulled away, standing despite the agony in his ribs. "The pack will kill you. The moment they know you've touched me, the moment they understand." Kira's expression hardened. She pointed to herself, then to the crescent brand. Then she made a gesture, cutting motion across her throat, palm downward. They would kill her regardless. They already had. The banishment was slow death, patient and inevitable. "Then we run," he said, the words emerging before thought could stop them. "North, into the old territories, where the old laws still hold, where a moon-marked pair can claim sanctuary." Kira shook her head. She moved to a corner of the cave where she had gathered things during his fever sleep: herbs, water, dried meat, but also something else. She withdrew a small pouch of leather and placed it in his hands. Inside were fragments of silver, each one carved with the sigil of the northern clans. Safe passage tokens, proof of alliance. Her hand trembled as she gave them to him, and he understood. She had been planning escape long before he had crashed, dying into her exile. She had been waiting. The goddess had been patient. The moon rose outside the cave, fuller now, closer, watching with the weight of destiny. Aster looked at the tokens, then at the woman who could not speak, but whose silence had become louder than any declaration. "If we do this," he said quietly, "there is no coming back. The pack will name us both traitors. I will lose my crown, my lands, everything." Kira stepped close to him and placed her fingers against his lips. Then she traced the crescent on her wrist and pointed upward to where the moon watched. She lowered her hand and placed it over his heart once more, feeling the rhythm align with her own. Her eyes said what her voice could not. "You already lost everything when you sent me away. I am offering you the only thing that remains, the truth." Aster closed his eyes. His wolf howled inside him, ancient and aching, finally recognizing its mate after years of exile in the dark. They traveled through the Shadowlands for 3 nights, moving only when darkness claimed the sky. Kira moved like smoke through the snow, her feet leaving no tracks despite the binding on her gift, or perhaps because of it. The silence that had been her curse became her greatest strength in the wilderness. She was invisible to those who hunted them. Aster was slower, his wounds still fresh, but with each passing hour his alpha blood began to knit bone and sinew together. Still, he could feel the wrongness in his chest, the wound his brother had carved into him, the betrayal that had shattered his trust. No amount of healing would mend that particular scar. On the second night, as they sheltered in the hollow of an ancient oak, Aster asked her, "How long have you known?" Kira did not answer. Instead, she withdrew a small object from the inner fold of her cloak, a mirror made of polished silver, ancient and inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. She held it up, and in the dim firelight, Aster saw his own reflection. But there was something else there, too. A shimmer, a second shadow that moved beneath his skin. His wolf. But also something more. A silver thread connected his heart to hers, visible only in the mirror's truth-telling surface. "Before the banishment?" he asked. She nodded once, slowly. "And you didn't tell me." Kira's expression hardened. She set down the mirror and rose, pacing the small space like a caged creature. Then she stopped and turned to him, her silver eyes blazing. She opened her mouth, and he heard it. A faint sound, like glass breaking, like magic tearing against iron. A single syllable, incomplete, anguished. The binding. Even in her fury, even in her need to speak, the magic held firm. She sat back down and picked up a stick of charred wood from the fire's edge. On the cave floor, she wrote in angry, jagged strokes, "You chose the pack over the bond. I stayed silent so you could choose free." Aster stared at the words until they blurred. The elders demanded. She crossed out the words violently and wrote again. "You decided I was dangerous. You decided my gift was curse. You decided love was weakness." "I was wrong," he said quietly. Kira threw the charred stick into the fire and wrapped her arms around herself. But after a long moment, she reached over and took his hand. The crescent on her wrist pulsed warmly against his skin. They sat in silence as the hours passed. Outside, the wind began to change, carrying with it the scent of the northern territories, pine and ice and ancient magic. In the mirror still lying between them, the silver thread connecting them began to glow brighter, steadier, as if their closeness was feeding its strength. "There's a place," Aster said finally, "beyond the northern ridge, in the old territories, the sanctuary of the Pathfinders. It's where those like you, those with gifts the pack fears, were supposed to go before the hierarchy decided silence was safer than courage." Kira squeezed his hand. "If we reach it, the old magic will protect us. The pack cannot touch us there. And your binding." He paused, studying the crescent mark. "I think your binding can be broken there. The Pathfinders know the old rituals. They know how to undo what fear has locked away." Kira's eyes widened. She placed both hands on his face, drawing him close until their foreheads touched. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw with a tenderness that belied the violence of their escape. When she pulled back, she placed a single finger against his lips and shook her head slightly. Then she wrote in the ashes, "Only if you choose me. Not destiny, not moon, not duty. You." Aster took the stick from her hand and wrote beneath her words, "I choose you. I have chosen you since the moment I saw your silver eyes and named them curse instead of miracle." Kira's composure fractured. Her entire body trembled, and though no sound emerged from her throat, he could see the tears tracking down her cheeks, silver in the firelight, like liquid metal. She pulled him close, and they remained intertwined as the night deepened, two exiles finding sanctuary in each other's warmth. Before dawn, Kira rose and moved to the mouth of the cave. She stood silhouetted against the pre-dawn darkness, and Aster watched as she closed her eyes. The crescent on her wrist blazed with light, and he heard it, a sound like wind, like distant bells, like the goddess herself speaking through the spaces between heartbeats. When Kira opened her eyes and turned back to him, he understood. She had sent a signal across the Shadowlands. She had called to the Pathfinders in the only language left to her, the language of moon and blood and ancient magic. The hunt had begun. They left the shelter as the sun crested the horizon, and Aster noticed something that made his breath catch. Kira's footprints in the snow were no longer invisible. They were marked with a faint silver sheen, visible only to those who knew how to look. A pathway, a beacon, an invitation to those who understood that sometimes the greatest gift is knowing when to stop hiding. The moon hung pale in the morning sky, and beneath it, a man and a woman began their journey north, toward redemption, toward sanctuary, toward a destiny neither could refuse and neither wanted to deny any longer. The northern ridge rose like a cathedral of ice and ancient stone, its peaks scratching the belly of the sky. Aster and Kira had been climbing for 2 days when the storm came, sudden and violent, as if the old magic itself was testing their resolve. Kira moved ahead, her feet finding purchase on stone that should have been impassable. Aster followed, his wounds reopened from the exertion, but his wolf strong, driven by the bond that now thrummed through his entire being. The crescent mark on Kira's wrist had begun to glow constantly, a beacon in the whiteout of the blizzard. It was during the 3rd hour of climbing that Aster's foot slipped. His hand shot out, grasping at frozen stone that crumbled beneath his fingers. For a moment, he was falling, gravity and death rushing up to claim him. Then Kira's hands caught his, and she pulled him upward with strength that should have been impossible. She was small, lean, marked by years of starvation and exile, yet she moved him across the treacherous slope as if he weighed nothing at all. When they reached the shelter of a cave mouth near the summit, Kira collapsed. Not from exhaustion, from the backlash of using magic that had been bound away from her for 7 years. Her entire body convulsed with silver light. The crescent on her wrist burned black at the edges, the binding reasserting itself, punishing her for transgression. Blood ran from her nose, her eyes, her ears, the price of defying the ritual that had locked her gift into submission. Aster caught her before she fell, cradling her against his chest as the silver light consumed her. "Hold on," he whispered. "We're almost there. The Pathfinders." But Kira's body went rigid in his arms. Her eyes rolled back, and for a heartbeat, Aster thought he had lost her. Then her mouth opened, and sound emerged. Not speech, something older. A keening that vibrated through the very stone of the mountain, a cry that was part grief, part rage, part ecstasy. It was the voice of the goddess herself, filtered through a throat that had been silent for 7 years. The binding shattered. Not completely, pieces of it still clung to her wrist like burned cloth, but the lock was broken. The magic flowed free, wild and beautiful, and absolutely terrifying. Kira's eyes opened, and they were no longer silver. They were the color of starlight on blood, ancient and fathomless. When she looked at Aster, he saw himself reflected there, not as Alpha King or exile or broken man, but as he truly was, a creature capable of both cruelty and love, neither redeemable nor damned, simply human. She reached up and placed her hands on his face. The moment her skin touched his, he felt it, the full weight of her gift, unbound and raw. He saw every moment she had been silent, every word locked in her throat, every choice she had made to protect him, even as he had sentenced her to exile. He saw the night she had known he would come to her in the snow, dying and lost. He saw the future, a path branching through darkness, leading to a place where the old magic still held dominion, where pathfinders dwelt in sanctuaries carved from the earth itself. And he saw the price of the moon mark, the price of true love in a world built on hierarchy and control. One of them would have to choose sacrifice. One of them would have to die so that the other could be free. Kira withdrew her hands, and Aster gasped like a man surfacing from deep water. Her eyes had returned to silver, but they held depth now. Terrible, beautiful depth. She sat up slowly and placed her hand over his heart. Then she pointed to the crescent brand on her wrist. The skin around it was beginning to fade, the black edges of the binding receding like the tide. She moved her finger along the marking, tracing its shape in the air. Then she placed her fingers against his chest and traced the same pattern over his heart. Understanding crashed through him. The binding had been on her wrist, visible for all to see, but his marking was invisible. It had been inscribed on the organ itself, the place where love lived and died. The moon mark had always been reciprocal, always shared, and now that she had broken her binding, his was breaking too. Kira stood and walked to the mouth of the cave, where the blizzard still raged with apocalyptic fury. She opened her arms, and the storm answered her call. The snow fell in patterns around her, forming shapes, wolves, birds, sacred geometry. She was speaking now, through magic instead of words, and the mountain itself was listening. The rocks beneath them began to glow with faint symbols. The cave wall shifted, revealing a pathway carved into the stone, a tunnel leading downward, deeper into the mountain, toward warmth and ancient sanctuary. The pathfinders had marked this place, and they had been waiting for someone like Kira to break her binding and call them forth. She turned back to Aster and extended her hand. Her eyes held a question. "Are you ready to lose everything?" He took her hand and rose. "Yes," he said aloud, knowing now that she could hear not just his voice, but the truth beneath it. "For you, I choose yes." The symbol of the Pathfinders blazed on her wrist, no longer a mark of banishment, but a seal of recognition. A homecoming. Together they descended into the mountain, into the darkness, into the place where the old magic still ruled and the goddess still wrote the fate of those brave enough to be broken. The sanctuary of the Pathfinders existed between light and shadow, carved into the deep places of the world where the first magic had taken root. Kira and Aster descended through corridors that seemed to shift with each step, passages that led both inward and upward, both to the earth's heart and toward some impossible sky. Figures moved in the darkness, women with eyes like Kira's, marked with crescents or stars or ancient symbols of power. They wore robes of silver and black, and they watched the newcomers with expressions that were neither welcoming nor hostile. Evaluative. Measuring. An elder approached, her hair white as snow, her eyes the color of old silver. She was small, fragile-looking, but Aster could feel the immensity of power radiating from her like heat from a forge. "The Alpha King comes seeking sanctuary," the elder said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "This is unusual. Kings do not flee. Kings do not bend to the will of the goddess." Aster stepped forward, but Kira placed a hand on his arm. She moved to stand before the elder, and when she opened her mouth, sound emerged, rough and beautiful and wholly her own. "He bent when it mattered," Kira said. Her voice was like ice breaking in spring, like thunder across distant mountains. "He bent when love demanded it." The elder's eyes widened. "The binding is broken?" "The binding is broken," Kira confirmed, "and I have come to break another." She took Aster's hand and placed it over her heart. Then she took his other hand and guided his fingers to touch the crescent on her wrist. Beneath her skin he felt it, the remnants of the ritual that had bound her, and more, threads of silver light connected to his own heart, the moon mark in its full manifestation. "This one," Kira said, looking at the elder. "I need you to sever it." The elder's expression became grave. If the moonmark is severed, the bond dies. You will lose not only the connection, but part of your own soul. It is not a gentle thing. I know, Kira said. And Aster realized she did know. She had foreseen it in the moment when her binding broke, when she saw the future branching in multiple directions. No, Aster said, pulling his hand away. There must be another way. I won't lose you. Kira turned to him, and her eyes held such compassion that his words died in his throat. You won't lose me. You'll free me. The moonmark was never meant to chain. It was meant to transform. She turned back to the elder. Can you do this? The elder studied them both for a long moment. Then she gestured, and other pathfinders emerged from the shadows, carrying ceremonial objects, silver bowls, crystal vessels, a dagger that seemed to be made of frozen moonlight. Understand, the elder said to Aster, that what you witness here is the greatest gift. Your love is strong enough to let her go. That strength is rare, and it will be remembered. They were led to a chamber where the walls glowed with the accumulated power of centuries. Kira removed her torn dress and knelt in the center of a circle inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Aster was positioned across from her, close enough to see her face, but not to touch. The ritual began at midnight, when the moon reached its zenith above the mountain. The elder began to chant in the old language, and the silver light intensified. Kira's body began to glow, the crescent on her wrist blazing brighter and brighter until Aster had to shield his eyes. He felt it then, the thread connecting their hearts beginning to unravel. It was agony, like watching someone pull a thread through his ribs, slowly and with terrible precision. Kira did not cry out, but her eyes never left his, even as the magic consumed her, even as the bond that had been written in their souls began to dissolve. The elder raised the moonlight dagger and drew it across the crescent on Kira's wrist. Silver blood flowed, not red, but luminous, ancient, filled with the power of every moment she had been bound and silent. Aster felt the final thread break. The backlash threw him backward, and he crashed against the chamber wall hard enough to crack bone. But he didn't care. He was watching Kira, watching as the crescent faded from her wrist, watching as the light in her eyes shifted from silver to something more human, more limited, more free. The circle dissolved. The chanting stopped. Kira stood alone, her body still glowing faintly, but no longer connected to his by threads of magic. She looked at her wrist, at the bare skin where the brand had been for 7 years. Then she looked at Aster. "It's done," she said. And her voice was different now, still beautiful, but no longer touched with the weight of destiny. It was simply her voice, made of breath and blood and choice. "What have you done?" Aster whispered, rising slowly. "What I should have done when I broke my binding," Kira said. She walked to him and placed her hand on his face. "I gave you your freedom. The moonmark would have bound you here, tied you to this sanctuary, this life. Now you can choose. You can return to the world if you wish. You can rebuild your pack, reclaim your throne." "I don't want the throne," Aster said. "I want you." "I know," Kira said. "That's why I had to set you free. Love built on chains, even beautiful chains, is not love. It's captivity wearing the mask of destiny." The elder approached, and Kira turned to her. "I will stay," she said. "I will train with the Pathfinders. I will learn to use my gift not as magic to be feared, but as power to heal. This is my choice, freely made." She looked back at Aster. "And you must make yours." Aster remained in the sanctuary for 3 days. He walked the silver corridors and watched the Pathfinders work their magic, healing wounds not with violence, but with understanding, with the knowledge that sometimes the deepest injuries are the ones we carry in our hearts. He watched Kira too, though she was careful not to let their eyes meet. She moved through the sanctuary like someone relearning how to exist without the weight of silence. Her laughter was tentative at first, then stronger, then fully realized. She had been in exile for 7 years. She had been bonded by magic for longer than that. Now, finally, she was simply herself. On the third night, the elder found Aster standing at the mouth of the sanctuary, looking out at the world beyond the mountain. Snow was falling, gentle and patient. "You've decided," the elder said. It was not a question. "I'm going back," Aster said, "to challenge my brother, to reclaim my pack, to prove that an alpha can choose mercy without losing strength." The elder nodded slowly. "It will be difficult. Many will believe you weak for loving one marked as cursed." "Then they will learn what it means to be strong," Aster said. "The old ways are dying. The pack that fears its own gifted members is a pack that will fall. I intend to rebuild it into something better." "And what of Kira?" Aster turned to face the elder fully. "She must remain here, safe, free. If I return to her, it must be as a man who chose her freely, not as an alpha bound by magic. And if I fail, if my brother kills me, or if the pack rejects me entirely, then she is not destroyed with me. She has already lost enough." The elder's expression softened. "That is a true choice. Love that is willing to be unreturned is love in its most noble form." She raised her hand, and Aster felt the last of the moon mark burning away from his heart. It should have hurt, this final severing. Instead, it felt like breathing. "Go," the elder said, "and know that you carry with you the blessing of the Pathfinders. If you succeed, Kira will know it, and she will have the freedom to choose whether to return to you. If you fail, she will mourn, but she will survive. That is the gift you have given her." Aster descended from the mountain alone. He did not say goodbye to Kira. Some truths were too heavy for words. But as he reached the lower slopes, he felt it, a warmth in his heart that was not magic, but something deeper. Her love, freely given and freely released. For the first time in his life, Aster understood what it meant to truly love someone. Not to possess them, not to bind them, not to expect their gratitude for his sacrifice, simply to wish them well, even if it meant letting them go. He traveled south toward the Pack territories, toward the confrontation that awaited him. The storm cleared as he descended, revealing a world transformed by winter. Everything was beautiful and sharp and unforgiving, just like the choice he had made. Behind him, in the sanctuary, Kira stood at a high window and watched his figure disappear into the forest. The elder found her there as the dawn began to break. "He's gone," the elder said gently. Kira nodded, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "He chose to let me be free," she said. "He chose right." "And what will you choose now?" Kira turned to face the elder, and her eyes held the light of a new day. "I will become strong. I will learn to heal, not just with magic, but with understanding. And if he returns, if he claims his throne and remakes the world into something where a woman with my gift can exist openly, then I will choose to return to him. But this time, it will be as equals. This time, it will be because we both chose it." She placed her hand over her heart, where the crescent had been. Though the brand was gone, she could still feel it, not as a chain, but as a scar, a reminder of everything she had survived. "Luna," the elder said, and Kira understood. This was her name now, not given by the pack, but chosen by herself. A name that meant she was no longer defined by her bondage. "You have learned the first and greatest magic, how to love yourself enough to let go." The pack territories were in chaos when Aster returned. His brother, Malachi, had taken the throne but ruled through fear rather than strength. The wolves were restless, the hunts were failing, and the older members of the pack whispered that the goddess had turned her face away in disapproval of the betrayal. Aster announced his return at the next full moon gathering. He stood before the assembled pack, no longer Alpha King, but something different, a man who had chosen exile and returned not with conquest, but with truth. "I was weak," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "I sent away one of our own because I feared her gift. I let fear make my decisions, and I brought shame upon this pack. For that, I apologize." The wolves murmured, confused. An alpha did not apologize. An alpha did not admit error. "But I have learned something in the wilderness," Aster continued. "True strength is not the absence of mercy. True strength is choosing compassion even when it costs us everything." Malachi emerged from the shadows, his massive wolf form bristling with aggression. "You speak like a broken creature, brother. The pack needs an alpha with teeth, not philosophy." "Then come," Aster said. "Let us settle this, not with violence but with single combat. The winner leads, but I warn you, I have nothing left to lose. I come without the chain of needing to be respected. I come only with the need to be right." They fought as wolves beneath the moon. Malachi was faster, more vicious, driven by the hunger to maintain his stolen throne. But Aster fought not to win, but to survive, and that changed everything. He took the wounds that Malachi dealt, and he kept rising. He endured. In the end, it was not a victory, but a transformation. Malachi's fury burned out, and he found himself facing a brother who would not break, would not retreat, would not allow the betrayal to define him. "I don't want to kill you," Aster said, pinning his brother to the frozen earth. "I want to show you what mercy looks like. I want to show the pack that we can be strong without destroying our own." He released Malachi and shifted back to human form, standing naked before the assembled wolves. "I am Alpha again," he said. "Not because I conquered, but because I refuse to be conquered by my own darkness. And the first law I establish is this: any pack member with a gift will be honored, not feared. Any one of us marked as cursed by our ancestors will be welcomed home." The older members of the pack stepped forward in their human forms. The elders who had pushed for Kira's banishment now faced Aster's judgment. "What say you?" he asked them. "Do you stand with a pack that honors its own, or do you cling to the old ways of fear?" One by one, they knelt. It took 3 months for Aster to fully reclaim the pack and rebuild it in his image. The changes were not easy. Some wolves left, unwilling to accept a leader who valued compassion. But many remained and adapted, and soon the territory began to heal. The hunts were successful again. The goddess seemed to smile upon them once more. On the spring equinox, when the snow was melting and the world was turning toward renewal, Aster stood at the edge of the north ridge and raised his hand to the sky. In it, he held an object of silver, a crescent medallion inscribed with symbols of the Pathfinders. He held it aloft and spoke the old words, the words used to call across the boundary between the pack territories and the sanctuary. "I am ready," he said, "if she will have me." Kira felt the call while she was meditating in the crystal chamber of the sanctuary. The elder was teaching her the final mysteries of her gift, how to see not just the wounds of the body, but the wounds of the soul, how to heal not with magic, but with presence. She felt the warmth in her heart, the exact spot where the moon mark had burned before it was severed. And in that warmth, she heard Aster's voice, carried across the distance by magic that had nothing to do with binding or destiny, everything to do with choice. "Kira," the elder said gently, "you have a visitor." The Pathfinders led her to the gateway, the place where the boundary between sanctuary and world grew thin. Aster stood there, no longer wearing the regalia of an alpha king. He wore simple clothes of gray and white, and his eyes held the weight of everything he had sacrificed. "I claimed the throne," he said without preamble. "I rebuilt the pack. I changed what I could change. But I did it all alone, and I was empty the entire time." Kira stepped forward slowly. "I didn't come here to ask you to return," Aster continued. "I came to ask if you would choose to return, not bound by magic or destiny, but by love freely given. I came to ask if you would build this new world with me. Not as a Luna, but as a partner, as an equal. Kira reached out and placed her hand on his face. Her touch carried the warmth of 3 months of healing, of learning to love herself, of becoming whole. Yes, she said. And it was the simplest, most perfect word she had ever spoken. She turned to the elder who stood at the threshold of the sanctuary. I am leaving, Kira said, but I will return. The Pathfinders are part of me now, and I will not forget. We know, the elder said. She raised her hand, and the crescent symbol on Kira's wrist, not as a brand, but as a luminous mark, glowed softly. You carry our light with you. Use it to illuminate the darkness. Aster took Kira's hand, and they descended from the mountain together. Behind them, the sanctuary faded into shadow and mystery. Ahead of them, the world was awakening to spring, to new growth, to possibility. They did not speak as they walked. Words felt inadequate for what they had found in silence and sacrifice. Instead, they moved together through the world transformed. Two people who had chosen each other not because fate demanded it, but because love had been worth every cost. When they reached the pack territories, the wolves greeted them without fear. The pack had learned that strength could wear the face of mercy, that an alpha could honor his own without becoming weak, that love was not a liability, but a foundation. Kira did not become Luna in the traditional sense. She became something different, something the old ways had no name for. A healer who walked among the pack, tending to wounds both physical and spiritual. Her gift, once feared as a curse, became recognized as a blessing. Those who had suffered isolation were drawn to her, knowing that she alone understood what it meant to be exiled, to be silenced, to be forced to choose between safety and truth. And Aster ruled not as a king, but as a leader, one who listened to the counsel of the Pathfinders, who honored those marked as different, who built a legacy not on conquest, but on compassion. On the summer solstice, beneath a sky burning with stars and a moon still visible in the twilight, they stood before the assembled pack. There was no formal ceremony, no ritual binding. Instead, Kira took Aster's hand and he took hers, and they simply declared, "We choose each other, not because we must, but because we will." The pack howled in approval, not from compulsion, but from genuine joy. The old ways were dying, and something new was being born. In that moment, the goddess smiled. The moon burned brighter than it had in centuries, and the prophecy that had been written in blood and snow and silver light came to its conclusion. The banished Omega and the fallen Alpha had remade the world not through war or magic, but through the courage to choose love when all other options seemed easier. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.